and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining me right now on the phone from Washington, D.C. is Congresswoman Iliana Ros Lehtinen. She represents the 27th District of Florida and serves as chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on the Middle East and South Asia. Thanks for being with us, as always.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure.
All right, first, Congresswoman, I want to get your reaction as someone who was born in Cuba but was forced to flee that nation under the Castro regime while you were a small child. What did you think about President Obama's handshake with Raul Castro at Nelson Mandela's funeral today?
Well, it was nauseating because I was born in Cuba, as you pointed out. I came here when I was a small child with my family, fleeing the aggression of the communist tyranny in Cuba, and to see the president of the United States shake hands with a sadistic murderer, which is what Raul Castro is and what he represents. It is nauseating. Now, I had the opportunity to ask Secretary Kerry today about that handshake, and I said, sometimes a handshake is just a handshake, but when the leader of the free world shakes the bloody hand of a ruthless dictator like Raul Castro, it becomes a propaganda coup for the tyrant. Raul Castro uses that hand to sign orders to repress and jail democracy advocates. And I pointed out what an irony it is that today is International Human Rights Day. And as we were speaking, as I asked Secretary Kerry, who was appearing before our Foreign Affairs Committee, lobbyists, advocates, freedom lovers, opposition leaders in Cuba were trying to commemorate International Human Rights Day, and for that they were detained and they were beaten. So I know what Raul Castro will do with those photos. He will show it in all the state-sponsored media because they don't have free media in Cuba, and he is a man who does not respect human rights at all. And I asked Secretary Kerry to make it clear to the world that U.S. policy toward this cruel and sadistic dictatorship is not going to be changing because of a handshake, because we need to get that message of hope to the opposition leaders, of which there are many in Cuba.
The president said in his speech today, honoring Nelson Mandela, he said, "We urge leaders to honor Mandela's struggle for freedom by upholding the basic human rights of their
And would
people."
you say Raul Castro is upholding the basic human rights?
No, absolutely not.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about your meeting with Secretary Kerry in just a second. But following up on this, obviously the cameras are rolling here, as we've seen. And I don't know, people can make their own judgments, but snubbing Castro may have looked bad as well. How would you advise the president on how he should handle these types of situations when he encounters a guy like Raul Castro, if that ever happens again?
Well, he's got to know that this was going to happen because he's sitting in that in that area where there's security, where there are other folks who representing their countries. Not that Raul Castro merits saying that he represents anything but a dictatorship, but he's got to know that he's going to be in that situation. There's really no reason to extend the hand. You can casually ignore someone, but look, I'm not going to make more of it than it is. Maybe it was just protocol and things that happen. What I want to make sure is that there's going to be no change in U.S. policy, because I worry about that more than I do about a handshake, because we've seen a change in U.S. policy toward Iran, and that's what brought Secretary Kerry here to speak before us in our Foreign Affairs Committee, and I care about that more than whether the president is smiling and shaking hands and bowing down to somebody. So I want to make sure that we are as tough as we can against the dictatorship and in favor of the Cuban people.
All right. Well, you made the transition for me because we also want to talk about Iran and that hearing on Capitol Hill today. A lot of people question whether President Obama commands enough respect from our adversaries, and we can point to this incident with Raul Castro as an example there. Some folks say this applies to as well with the developments with Iran. Tuesday, Secretary of State John Kerry was on the Hill talking to your subcommittee, trying to convince a bipartisan group of lawmakers on the House and Senate side not to move ahead with new sanctions against Iran while the Islamic Republic tries to work with the U.S. and other world powers on a longer-term weapons deal. Iran says it's already started to open up its facilities, part of that temporary plan that was hatched in Geneva, but some senators and House members, and I assume you're in this group, want to tighten those sanctions even further now. Is Secretary Kerry going to be able to convince anyone like yourself or Democratic Senator Bob Menendez that these new sanctions might be a bad idea?
I don't think that he's going to be successful, but it is going to be difficult to pass these new sanctions. We passed them in the House; they're pending in the Senate, and the power of one senator, just Harry Reid, stopping it is the rules are so different there. But I told the secretary that he had said on 60 Minutes that on a nuclear deal with Iran, he said a bad deal is worse than no deal. And I said, this is a bad deal because it's really the death knell of our sanctions policy. It threatens our closest ally, the Democratic Jewish State of Israel, and we're accepting Iran's illegitimate claim to a right to enrich. We say, oh, no, they don't have that right, but Iran says, hey, this deal gives us this right, and that's why we were so eager to sign it. So I think this is what's going to happen. We set the bar so low. It's lower than U.S. law. It's lower than the UN Security Council resolutions that Iran is going to invite the world to come to its land, inspect everything, because it will not be in violation of the deal. I think that they will comply, and we will be effusive of, oh, look what a wonderful country this is. They are complying with the deal. Yeah, because we lowered the bar. This is a lower threshold than the UN Security Council resolution. It's lower than U.S. law. So when you make the stakes low, yeah, they're going to comply. And then I'm telling you, 6 months from now, we're going to say, boy, President Obama really deserved that Nobel Peace Prize because he really worked out this deal to have a nuclear-free Iran. And all we're doing is accepting the nuclear power of Iran and fooling ourselves into thinking that they're using it for peaceful purposes.
Now, Iran's foreign minister does say if there are any new sanctions, this Geneva agreement will be over and any hopes of a longer-term nuclear weapons deal will be gone too. Do you think in that case that he's just bluffing if there are new sanctions? I mean, we've seen how these sanctions have crippled the Iranian economy and obviously, kind of opened things up to negotiating with the nation. But do you think that the Iranians are bluffing at this point, that if these new sanctions are passed, that they still might be willing to negotiate?
Well, I think that the Iranians have nothing to lose with continuing to negotiate because they're negotiating from strength and we're negotiating from weakness. And I think that when Secretary Kerry says these sanctions have worked because it's brought Iranians to the negotiation table, that's never has been the case of why we had sanctions. We had sanctions to cripple the Iranian economy and to force Iran to abandon its nuclear capability. They weren't set up so that they could negotiate with us. They weren't a negotiating tool. It was to dismantle everything and weaken this dictatorship. So I think that we keep lowering the bar and lowering the expectations so that then we can salute Iran and say, wow, you see, they've complied with everything. Aren't we great? We were really tough. And in fact, we have not been tough at all. Sanctions are needed. We passed them in the House. We need to pass them now in the Senate. And I am the author of the toughest sanctions legislation that we have on the books right now. And yet the administration keeps giving waivers and they keep giving exemptions. So even if we were just to enforce the existing sanctions, we would be in a better shape.
All right. Well, John Kerry will be back on Capitol Hill tomorrow, this time talking to the Senate. But you mentioned Senator Harry Reid has a stop on the sanction at this point, but we'll see where things go from here. Congresswoman,
well, thank you. Look forward to discussing it as it moves along.
Well, we'll talk to you again soon. Congresswoman Iliana Ros Lehtinen, thank for being with us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching Newsmax.